When players first set foot into the world of Unova, they entered a region unlike any that had come before. Inspired by the sprawling diversity of New York City and its surrounding landscapes, this generation introduced a full roster of new creatures, breaking the tradition of mixing familiar faces with new ones. For the first time, the Pokédex started fresh, immersing players in a journey where every encounter felt unfamiliar. This bold decision made the fifth generation stand out immediately, reinforcing the idea that Unova was meant to be a reset, a place where discovery itself was the central theme. Among the earliest Pokemon players encountered in this region was Snivy, the sleek, grass-type starter. Its design drew heavily from themes of royalty and nobility, with a slender, serpentine body that suggested both elegance and cunning. The choice to give it small limbs hinted at its evolutionary line, moving toward a regal serpent form, and its final stage, Superior, embodied aristocratic authority. Competitive players noted that Superior's eventual ability, Contrary, allowed it to turn stat drops into boosts when paired with moves like Leaf Storm, creating one of the most surprising powerhouses in later generations. This fusion of grace and tactical strength made Snivy and its line one of the most memorable parts of Unova's roster. The fire-type starter, Tepig, followed a very different path. Designed as a small piglet with a playful personality, it grew into a line inspired by both boars and the imagery of sumo wrestlers or performers from traditional festivals. Its final evolution, Embor, carried flaming whiskers and a design echoing fire dancing traditions. Some fans noted parallels to Chinese zodiac animals, as Embor represented the pig, continuing a pattern found in other fire starters. Competitively, Embor offered mixed results, with high attack power offset by low speed, but its cultural inspiration gave it an enduring identity. Tepig's line reminded players of the creative blending of animals, folklore, and symbolic archetypes that defined Unova's designs. The final starter of the trio, Oshawott, became instantly recognizable thanks to its seashell weapon. This design tied directly to samurai imagery, with its evolutionary line culminating in Samurott, a warrior-like otter whose armor and stance resembled traditional Japanese swordsmen. Early concept art revealed even more overt samurai influences, and though some of those ideas were streamlined in the final design, the spirit remained intact. Samurott carried a sense of discipline and nobility. In competitive play, Samurott found niches as a mixed attacker, but its lasting impression lay in its unique design and storytelling qualities, connecting players to cultural imagery rarely explored in previous generations. The boldness of Unova extended beyond the starters. Pokemon like Zoroark pushed the boundaries of gameplay mechanics with its unique ability, Illusion. This trait allowed it to disguise itself as another member of the team until it took damage, creating mind games that were both thrilling and frustrating for opponents. Zoroark's reveal was also unusual in that it was heavily marketed before the release of the games, even starring in a feature film. This early spotlight marked a shift in how the franchise introduced new species, showing how the developers viewed it as a symbol of the new generation's creativity. Lore-wise, Zoroark and its pre-evolutions were tied to illusions and trickery, drawing from folklore about mischievous foxes capable of shape-shifting. Another striking entry from this region was Volcarona, the fiery moth whose presence carried mythological weight. In-game, it was presented as a rare and powerful encounter deep within the Relic Castle, reinforcing its status as something special. Its design combined elements of a moth with solar imagery, giving it an almost divine presence. The lore suggested that it could replace the sun itself during times of darkness, elevating it beyond the level of an ordinary species. Competitively, Volcarona became a terror thanks to its signature move, Quiver Dance, which boosted speed, special attack, and special defense all at once. This combination made it one of the most feared sweepers in competitive history, a fact that only deepened its cultural impact. Chandelure represented another example of Unova's bold design philosophy. Taking inspiration from Gothic chandeliers, it combined ghost and fire typing into a hauntingly elegant form. Its Pokédex entries described its flames as consuming the spirits of the living, making it one of the darker concepts of the generation. Despite this grim lore, its design carried a striking aesthetic appeal, and it became beloved by fans for its eerie beauty. In battle, Chandelure was notable for its incredible special attack, ranking among the highest in the entire series. Its competitive presence was cemented by its ability to hit hard and threaten even bulky opponents, giving it staying power across multiple formats. The balance of dark lore, visual creativity, and raw strength made it one of the most iconic ghost types in the franchise. The legendary trio of Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion added another layer of myth to Unova's narrative. Collectively known as the Swords of Justice, they were inspired by the Three Musketeers, with each representing different virtues of leadership, resilience, and compassion. Their designs incorporated elements of deer, bulls, and other ungulates, tied together by armor-like features that emphasized nobility. In gameplay, they balanced offense and defense in unique ways, offering diverse roles in competitive teams. Their cultural role extended into the anime as well, where they were depicted as protectors of Pokémon against human harm. This moral framing tied them to themes of justice and protection, enriching the region's lore with stories that resonated beyond simple battles. Reshiram and Zekrom served as the dual mascots of the fifth generation, representing truth and ideals. Reshiram, with its white, feathery design and fire typing, symbolized warmth and honesty, while Zekrom, with its darker, more mechanical look and electric typing, embodied passion and conviction. Their story was tied directly to Unova's central narrative, where ancient heroes once wielded them in a conflict about differing philosophies. This thematic depth made their presence more than just legendary battles. They embodied the struggle of ideas. The game's version exclusivity reinforced this duality, as players were asked to choose not just which box art they preferred, but which philosophy resonated with them. Kyurem, the third member of their trio, expanded the myth further. Represented as an incomplete dragon, it symbolized absence and emptiness, embodying what was left when truth and ideals were separated. Its icy design suggested desolation, and later forms introduced in Black 2 and White 2, Black Kyurem and White Kyurem, fused it with the power of Reshiram or Zekrom, creating some of the most visually striking and powerful forms in the series. Kyurem's myth reflected themes of incompleteness and balance, deepening Unova's overarching narrative about duality and unity. Together, these legendary dragons tied Unova to grand themes rarely seen in earlier regions. Where Kanto had science and Johto had tradition, Unova carried philosophical weight, exploring how differing ideals could shape societies. Their designs, battles, and lore blended seamlessly into the game's core, making them more than just endgame challenges. They were the embodiment of the region's identity, carrying its philosophy within their forms. Unova also introduced a unique approach to environmental storytelling through its cities. Castelia City, modeled after New York, stood as one of the most ambitious locations in the series, with its towering skyscrapers and bustling docks. The sheer scale of the city emphasized how the world of Pokemon had grown, pushing the boundaries of what handheld consoles could depict. Other locations, like the Desert Resort and the Celestial Dragon Spiral Tower, blended culture, history, and atmosphere, giving Unova a sense of depth that elevated its storytelling. The decision to fill the regional Pokédex entirely with new species created lasting debates within the fan base. Some praised the boldness of offering a fresh start, while others longed for familiar faces. Yet this choice forced players to form attachments to new creatures, ensuring that Unova's roster would be remembered not as supplements, but as stars in their own right. The result was a generation filled with obscure details, creative risks, and cultural references that still fuel discussion today. The world of Unova stood apart from earlier regions in almost every respect, where Kanto, Johto, Hoenn, and Sinnoh each drew inspiration from Japanese geography, traditions, and architecture. Unova was modeled after an entirely different place, the bustling energy of New York City and the surrounding state. This shift in inspiration marked the first time the series deliberately grounded a region in a location outside Japan, and the decision was nothing short of transformative. It gave Unova a sense of scale, diversity, and modernity that no earlier setting had attempted. One of the most striking features of Unova was its commitment to urban density. Castelia City towered with skyscrapers, office buildings, and a harbor filled with ships. Walking through its streets conveyed a sense of scale that overwhelmed many players who were used to smaller towns and villages. The city also played a cultural role, housing art galleries, corporate offices, and even the Game Freak headquarters. This blend of real-world influence and in-universe storytelling captured the excitement of exploring a metropolis where battles were just one small part of life. The theme of urbanization extended to Nimbasa City, another cultural hub that showcased amusement parks, sports domes, and subway systems. By tying gyms and story elements to entertainment and transportation, Nimbasa highlighted the series' willingness to broaden its scope. Pokemon were not only creatures to battle with, but also performers in musicals and companions in sports-inspired activities. This thematic expansion suggested that the bond between humans and Pokemon could exist in countless forms, not just through combat. Contrasting these hubs of modernity were locations steeped in mystery and history. Dragon Spiral Tower, one of the tallest structures ever introduced, stood as a monument to ancient myths. Its spiraling design symbolized the intertwining of truth and ideals, central to the region's legendary story. The tower's crumbling stonework and mystical aura carried echoes of temples and sacred structures, grounding Unova's philosophical themes in physical architecture. Here, players confronted not only legendary dragons, but also the weight of history itself. Similarly, the Desert Resort and Relic Castle introduced players to ruins buried beneath shifting sands. These locations emphasized the passage of time, with relics of forgotten civilizations hidden in the desert's heart. The decision to tie encounters like Volcarona to these ruins underscored how Unova connected mythology to geography, showing that legendary Pokemon were not just powerful entities, but cultural cornerstones of vanished societies. The environmental variety of Unova also stood out. The region spanned bustling cities, dense forests, vast deserts, snowy mountains, and even industrial zones, reflecting the diversity of New York's geography. Locations like Chargestone Cave demonstrated the developer's creative ambition, with floating crystals that glowed and pulsed with energy. This area was not only a striking visual showcase for the Nintendo DS hardware, but also a symbolic nod to the region's theme of energy and progress. The interplay of technology and nature was constant, from solar-powered walkways in towns to routes lined with bridges spanning rivers and canyons. The bridges themselves became cultural landmarks. Sky Arrow Bridge, stretching across a massive bay, was one of the most ambitious pieces of in-game architecture. Its sheer scale left an impression, capturing the awe of crossing a suspension bridge that mirrored New York's Brooklyn Bridge in inspiration. The bridge was more than a passage, it was a statement about scope, scale, and the evolving ambition of the series. Players paused simply to watch their character shrink against the enormity of the span, an experience rarely evoked in earlier games. Another defining element of Unova was its approach to story. For the first time, narrative took center stage in a way that rivaled the gameplay itself. The conflict between Team Plasma and the player was rooted not in simple theft or domination, but in ideology. Plasma's leaders questioned whether humans had the right to use Pokémon in battle, raising moral questions that had lingered beneath the surface of the series since its inception. This philosophical framing made the story more mature, inviting players to think critically about the bonds they formed with their companions. The character of N embodied this philosophical core. As a leader raised alongside Pokémon, he saw them not as tools, but as equals. His role in the story was not merely antagonistic, but deeply sympathetic, as he challenged the player to justify their journey. This level of nuance had rarely been seen in earlier titles, where villains often sought power for selfish ends. N's presence elevated the narrative of Unova, turning it into a meditation on freedom, relationships, and differing perspectives. Unova also made bold choices with its Pokédex, by excluding all older species in the main story until the post-game. It forced players into a complete reset. Every route offered entirely new creatures, ensuring that discovery remained central. While divisive among fans at the time, this decision reinforced the idea that Unova was meant to feel like a new beginning, a symbolic rebirth for the franchise. The absence of familiar species like Pikachu or Zubat made the region stand on its own, further emphasizing its identity as something fresh and experimental. Even the post-game areas carried thematic weight. The Battle Subway offered a streamlined but challenging arena for players to hone their skills, while White Forest and Black City provided version-exclusive locations that emphasized the duality of abundance and scarcity. These areas reflected the game's broader themes of balance and contrast, tying back to the legendary dragon's narrative of truth versus ideals. Obscure details about the region reveal just how much thought went into its creation. For example, many of the towns and cities in Unova take their names from atmospheric and material themes. Some echo weather and wind, others suggest clarity, light, or even crafted textures. Rather than being tied to a single naming rule, the pattern reflects a broad palette of natural and cultural influences. This naming convention tied the geography to the sky, a symbolic backdrop for the legendary dragons whose battles represented opposing forces. It was another way the developers ensured that the entire region, down to its language, echoed its philosophical core. Another overlooked detail was how the seasons played a role in gameplay. Unova was the first region to introduce a seasonal cycle, with routes and encounters changing depending on the time of year. This mechanic made the world feel more alive and connected to natural rhythms, expanding immersion and replayability. While later games did not retain the system, it remains one of the most memorable features of the fifth generation. Music also played a larger role in shaping atmosphere. Unova's soundtrack experimented with genre and instrumentation, from the jazz-inspired tracks of Castilia to the haunting tones of Dragon Spiral Tower. Some areas even layered sound effects into the music, such as drums mimicking the noise of trains in Nimbasa or footsteps echoing in caves. This auditory variety reinforced the region's cultural diversity, giving each location its own identity. Cultural commentary seeped into the region's design as well. The presence of sprawling cities, industrial areas, and busy harbors reflected real-world themes of urban growth and globalization. At the same time, remote ruins, forests, and sacred towers preserved ties to tradition and mythology. This contrast between progress and heritage paralleled the philosophical clash between truth and ideals, reminding players that Unova was as much about reconciling opposites as it was about battling rivals. By the time players reached the Pokemon League, the weight of these themes had built steadily. The Elite Four chambers, each styled after different motifs, reinforced the region's diversity while presenting some of the most dramatic staging in the series. The subsequent battle with N, followed by the confrontation with Ketsis, brought the story's moral questions to a climax. Rarely before had a Pokemon narrative invested so heavily in ideas rather than mere conflict. In many ways, Unova represented the series at its most experimental, a bold new region that redefined what a Pokemon journey could feel like. It was not only about the creatures players met, but also about the philosophies they encountered, the environments they explored, and the cultural contrasts they navigated. Its ambition made it unforgettable, and its willingness to challenge expectations cemented its legacy as one of the most daring entries in the franchise. The region of Unova stood apart not only for its geography, but also for the weight of its mythology. While earlier regions had drawn on legends of creation or guardians of nature, Unova's story centered on the struggles of human philosophy. At the heart of this myth were twin heroes who long ago sought to shape the region with their dragons. One valued truth, the clarity of honesty and the light of understanding. The other valued ideals, the pursuit of vision and the power of conviction. Together they had once been united, but their split gave rise to opposing forces, embodied in the legendary forms that players would later encounter. This story framed the region as a land not of mere survival or worship, but of thought itself, a place where ideas carried as much weight as battles. Dragon Spiral Tower served as the physical monument to this myth. Its crumbling structure suggested ancient origins, with its spiral design embodying the intertwined philosophies of truth and ideals. The tower's weathered stones seemed to lean with age, as though holding the weight of countless generations. It was here that players confronted the dragons, experiencing firsthand how architecture itself could narrate history. Unlike temples or ruins in other regions, Dragon Spiral Tower was not only a stage for legendary encounters, but a living artifact of philosophical conflict. The story of the heroes extended beyond the tower. Unova's lore suggested that the land itself had been shaped by the dragons' influence, their battles carving the foundations of the region. Curem, The third figure in this myth symbolized what was lost when truth and ideals were torn apart. This incomplete dragon carried an aura of absence, a chilling reminder that division always left something missing. Its frozen form and desolate lair in Giant Chasm reinforced this symbolism. Here, players were reminded that the consequences of conflict were not only philosophical but tangible, etched into the land itself. Beyond myth, the region also wove history into its fabric. Locations like Relic Castle and the Desert Resort hinted at ancient civilizations that had thrived long before modern cities rose. The presence of hieroglyph-like carvings and buried passageways suggested a culture with its own rituals and symbols. These ruins offered glimpses into a past where Pokemon and humans coexisted differently, their relationship framed by reverence rather than utility. The choice to place a powerful guardian like Volcarona deep within these ruins tied the idea of myth to geography, reinforcing the notion that the land itself preserved memory. Another layer of history appeared in Opelucid City, a location that shifted depending on the version of the game. In one version, the city appeared modern, filled with technology and gleaming white facades. In the other, it appeared ancient, with stone streets and a more traditional design. This duality reflected the region's themes of contrast, showing how the same place could embody both progress and heritage. It was a rare example of version exclusivity affecting not just encounters, but entire cultural experiences, reminding players that perspective shaped reality. The idea of duality extended even to the region's governance. The Pokemon League itself was framed not as an isolated gauntlet, but as a culmination of the region's philosophical journey. Trainers ascended through chambers filled with dramatic design, swirling books, fiery motifs, and shadowed halls, each reflecting the identity of the Elite Four members. These designs suggested that the League was not merely a battleground, but a cultural institution, preserving both artistry and authority. Facing the champions of Unova meant not only proving strength, but demonstrating understanding of the region's complexity. Obscure details highlight how deeply this philosophy permeated the design. For example, the naming of cities after cloud formations tied the entire region to the sky, a symbolic canvas for the legendary dragons. Towns like Striaton, Nimbasa, and Mistralton echoed this theme, grounding even mundane locations in atmospheric symbolism. This subtle naming scheme reinforced the idea that Unova was a region of perspective, where the horizon and the heavens framed the struggles below. The introduction of seasons also added depth to the region's identity. Unlike earlier titles, where environments were static, Unova shifted with time. Leaves turned red in autumn, snow blanketed the ground in winter, and certain species appeared or disappeared depending on the season. This feature gave the impression that the region was alive, changing with natural rhythms just as cities pulsed with human activity. Though later games abandoned this system, its presence in Unova made the region feel dynamic, as though it breathed alongside the player's journey. Cultural variety was another hallmark of the region. From the bustling ports of Castelia to the tranquil farmlands of Floxacy, Unova contained multitudes. Musical inspiration ranged from jazz and rock to somber organ chords, ensuring that every town and route carried its own atmosphere. Nimbasa's carnival-like energy contrasted sharply with the eerie stillness of the strange house, while the industrial clang of Chargestone Cave contrasted with the natural harmony of Pinwheel Forest. Each space reflected not only a location, but a cultural mood, deepening immersion and making the region memorable. The presence of Team Plasma added yet another dimension. Unlike earlier villainous teams, which often pursued wealth or domination, Plasma cloaked itself in ideology. Their goal was to separate humans from Pokemon, framing battles as exploitation. While their hypocrisy became clear under Getsis, the philosophy they preached still resonated. It forced players to consider whether their own bonds were altruistic or selfish. This moral complexity elevated Plasma above many earlier antagonists, making them a narrative force that shaped how players thought about the world around them. At the center of this ideology was N, a character who defied easy categorization. Raised among Pokemon, he believed that their voices mattered just as much as those of humans. His challenge to the player was not rooted in greed, but in conviction. By confronting him, players engaged in a battle not only of strength, but of philosophy, defending their bonds as meaningful rather than exploitative. His gentle demeanor, combined with his radical ideas, made him one of the most beloved and complex figures in the series' history. Obscure trivia ties N's character even deeper to the region's identity. His name, short and simple, was chosen to reflect both neutrality and infinity, a letter that suggested openness, possibility, and balance. His affinity for dragons further reinforced his symbolic connection to the themes of truth and ideals, as he stood poised between opposing forces. In many ways, N became the human embodiment of Unova's philosophical struggle, a bridge between the myths of the past and the choices of the present. Even smaller details carried weight. The Ferris wheel scene in Nimbasa, for instance, symbolized intimacy and perspective, offering players a moment of quiet reflection with a character who otherwise embodied conflict. This subtle storytelling emphasized the developers' commitment to blending gameplay with narrative, ensuring that even optional encounters carried emotional meaning. Beyond story, Unova also experimented with presentation. Camera angles shifted dramatically in certain locations, such as the sweeping pan across Sky Arrow Bridge or the top-down descent into Castelia. These cinematic touches emphasize the developer's ambition to make the region feel alive and cinematic, pushing the Nintendo DS hardware to its limits. This technical innovation mirrored the thematic innovation of the region itself, bold, experimental, and unafraid to break tradition. Together, these layers of mythology, history, culture, and presentation ensured that Unova felt richer and more daring than any region before it. Its willingness to embrace duality, to challenge moral assumptions, and to weave philosophy into geography set it apart as a landmark in the franchise. Every ruin, tower, and city carried meaning, ensuring that the journey through the region was not simply a sequence of battles, but a meditation on perspective, legacy, and ideals. Among the most intriguing aspects of Unova were the places that often went overlooked, side paths, and hidden areas that told stories as rich as the main adventure. Beyond the bustling cities and legendary towers lay spaces that carried quiet mysteries, eerie atmospheres, or cultural flourishes. These places gave the region texture, showing that it was more than a stage for battles. It was a living world filled with forgotten corners, symbolic bridges, and haunted houses. The Strange House was one such location, tucked away on the eastern edge of the region near Lentimus Town. From the moment players entered, the atmosphere shifted into something chilling. Furniture moved on its own, corridors rearranged themselves, and eerie music underscored the sense of unease. The Strange House culminated in a meeting with a ghostly girl who spoke briefly before vanishing. This spectral presence left fans speculating endlessly about her origins. Was she a lost soul tied to the ghost-type Pokémon often found within, or a fragment of the region's broader supernatural lore? No clear answers were ever provided, making the house a haunting puzzle that still lingers in the memories of players who stumbled into its unsettling halls. Bridges played an unusually large role in Unova's identity, acting as both practical crossings and symbolic landmarks. The Sky Arrow Bridge, stretching across a wide bay, offered one of the most breathtaking transitions in the series. Its sheer scale dwarfed the player character, and the camera angle shifted dramatically as they walked across, reinforcing its grandeur. This design choice emphasized the ambition of the developers, who wanted players to feel the immensity of the world. The bridge's inspiration from real-world structures, like the Brooklyn Bridge, tied Unova firmly to its New York roots. Crossing it felt less like gameplay and more like an awe-inspiring experience, a moment of scale rarely attempted in handheld titles. Marvelous Bridge carried a different kind of mystique. Sleek and modern in appearance, it also contained secrets. One of the strangest details was the presence of the so-called Ghost Girl, an NPC who appeared briefly before disappearing if approached. This subtle encounter echoed the eerie mystery of the strange house, tying ghostly phenomena into the broader fabric of the region. Marvelous Bridge also hosted the Magikarp Salesman, a throwback to earlier generations that reminded players of the series' playful continuity. The combination of modern design, unsettling mystery, and nostalgic callbacks made Marvelous Bridge a microcosm of Unova's identity, bold and new, yet aware of its roots. Village Bridge stood apart as one of the most atmospheric locations in the region. Rather than relying on scripted story beats, it came alive through subtle world building. Musicians hidden across the area added layers to the soundtrack as players discovered them, turning the bridge into a living symphony. Residents prepared food, fished in the river, and spoke with unique dialogue, making the location feel like a genuine community rather than a simple route. The inclusion of a small basketball court and other details gave the bridge a sense of culture that no other route in the series had captured before. It was not only a place to pass through, but a space to linger, soaking in its atmosphere and rhythm. Obscure trivia about Village Bridge highlights its unique design. Unlike most areas, it contained hidden depth in both music and dialogue that rewarded patient exploration. The layering of instruments in the soundtrack created a meditative effect, perfect for players who paused to listen. This blending of sound and space made Village Bridge stand as one of the most creative and immersive areas in all of Pokémon, reinforcing Unova's identity as a region unafraid to experiment. Another overlooked detail of the region lay in the abyssal ruins, submerged deep beneath Undella Bay. These ruins required players to dive and navigate through chambers filled with ancient writing and treasures. The inscriptions referenced an ancient king and the wealth of a forgotten civilization, hinting at lore that was never fully explained. Items like plates, which connected to the legendary figure Arceus, suggested ties between Unova and the broader mythology of the Pokémon world. The fact that these ruins remained enigmatic, with text that could be translated but never fully contextualized, made them one of the most mysterious areas in the series. Undella Town, near the ruins, provided a striking tonal contrast. While most towns in the series were practical stops on the journey, Undella reflected luxury and leisure. Its beachfront villas and seasonal shifts in population gave it the feeling of a resort town. In summer, it bustled with wealthy visitors, while in other seasons it became eerily quiet. This design reflected themes of transience and impermanence, reminding players that not all locations existed solely for their benefit. Undella's duality of opulence and emptiness mirrored the broader contrasts of the region, reinforcing the idea that Unova thrived on balancing opposites. Humor and nostalgia also played roles in these overlooked corners. The presence of the old Magikarp salesman on Marvelous Bridge connected Unova to Kanto, reminding players of how traditions carried forward, even in new lands. Small references like this helped ground the region in the continuity of the larger Pokemon world. It showed that even in a place meant to feel like a reset, the threads of history remained intact, weaving generations together. Another mysterious site was the Nature Preserve, accessible only after filling the National Pokédex in Black 2 and White 2. Hidden behind layers of challenge, this location rewarded dedication with the sight of a rare shiny Haxorus waiting in the forest. The preserve was a reward, not just in terms of gameplay, but in atmosphere. With tranquil music and serene design, it served as a reminder that patience and persistence were valued in the Pokemon world, and that true discovery often lay off the beaten path. Obscure elements also extended to character-driven side stories. For example, the Riches family in Undella offered a daily series of battles, reflecting both their wealth and the player's persistence. These encounters were not essential to the main journey, but added depth to the region, illustrating the diversity of lifestyles within Unova. Similarly, the optional encounters with Cynthia, the champion from Sinnoh, tied the region to its predecessors. Her presence suggested a continuity of champions and legacies, reinforcing the interconnectedness of the Pokemon world. Even in minor corners, the region layered history and mystery. The Strange House, connected to the Lunar Wing, an item associated with the mythical creature Cresselia. This link suggested that the house's ghostly girl may have been tied to dreams and nightmares, though the game never confirmed it. Such ambiguity left room for fan interpretation, allowing the community to weave theories and stories that expanded the lore. In this way, Unova's mysteries extended beyond the cartridge, living on in discussions and speculations long after the game's release. Perhaps the most remarkable quality of these overlooked areas was how they embodied the themes of Unova as a whole. They highlighted contrasts between old and new, presence and absence, noise and silence. They rewarded exploration, not with power alone, but with atmosphere and mystery. They demonstrated that the region was not simply a collection of routes and gyms, but a world with texture, depth, and meaning. Taken together, these hidden corners ensured that Unova stood out, not only for its grand narrative, but also for its quiet moments. A player could feel awe crossing Sky Arrow Bridge, curiosity unraveling the abyssal ruins, serenity listening to Village Bridge's musicians, or unease wandering through the Strange House. Each of these experiences enriched the journey, making it clear that Unova was a region built not only for battles, but for stories, both spoken and unspoken. The gyms of Unova carried a unique energy, reflecting not just the personalities of their leaders, but also the broader philosophy of the region. Unlike earlier generations, where gym design often served as straightforward puzzles or tests of type matchups, the fifth generation leaned into spectacle, culture, and experimentation. Each gym became a stage, and each leader a performer whose identity extended beyond the confines of battle. This choice made them some of the most memorable in the series, offering not only challenge but also character-driven storytelling. The very first gym set the tone for this experimentation, Located in Striaton City, it introduced the concept of rotating leaders. Depending on the player's starter, they faced either Chili, Ceylon, or Cress, each specializing in a type that countered the player's choice. This mechanic reinforced the educational role of gyms, teaching type advantage in a tangible and immediate way. The cafe theme of the gym tied their identities together, suggesting that they were not only leaders, but also community figures who embodied the social aspect of food and hospitality. While earlier gyms had toyed with themes, Striaton's was the first to fully integrate a lifestyle identity into its design. Nakreen City's gym continued this experimental streak with one of the most creative designs of the generation. Set within a museum and library, it combined culture, history, and learning into a single space. The leader, Lenora, doubled as a curator, embodying the role of preservation and scholarship. Players solved puzzles by uncovering clues hidden among books and exhibits, blending gameplay with education. This integration of intellectual pursuit and battling reflected Unova's broader ambition to expand what a gym could mean. It suggested that knowledge and history were just as important as strength, tying the idea of guardianship to cultural heritage. Castelia City's gym offered another dramatic shift. Situated within the skyscraper-filled metropolis, it reflected the hustle and energy of the city itself. The gym's interior was filled with honeycomb walls and sliding doors, creating a labyrinth that demanded both patience and observation. The leader, Berg, represented artistic expression, and his focus on bug-type Pokémon reinforced this theme. Berg's identity as an artist blurred the line between battling and creativity, tying the competitive act of Pokémon battles to broader forms of cultural contribution. His gym reminded players that art could manifest in many ways, even in the strategies of a fight. Nimbasa City's gym embraced performance even more overtly. Depending on the version of the game, players encountered either Alessa's catwalk, filled with dazzling lights, or an electrified roller coaster that emphasized thrill and spectacle. Elisa's identity as a fashion model reinforced the connection between battling and performance, highlighting how Pokémon could integrate into popular culture. Her role also extended beyond the gym, as she influenced characters like Bianca, encouraging them to pursue their journeys. This blending of mentorship, celebrity, and athleticism made her one of the most memorable figures in Unova. Driftvale City's gym stood in stark contrast, emphasizing grit and labor over glamour. Situated beneath the ground, it resembled a mining operation with elevators and heavy machinery. Clay, the leader, represented practicality, industry, and the unyielding nature of Earth. His dialogue often reflected a businesslike mentality, reinforcing his role as a man of work and results. This grounded approach balanced the more flamboyant gyms, reminding players that Unova contained not only spectacle, but also hardworking communities that valued persistence and effort. Mistralton City's gym combined aviation with battling, highlighting the theme of progress and exploration. Set within an aircraft hangar, the gym forced players to navigate strong gusts of wind that pushed them back, a physical representation of resistance and perseverance. Skyla, the leader, embodied adventure and ambition, tying her identity to the spirit of flight. Her gym reflected the optimism of exploration, suggesting that battles could symbolize journeys into the unknown. This thematic integration tied her role as a pilot to her position as a leader, reinforcing the idea that gyms were not just about combat, but about embodying lifestyles. Osiris City's gym returned to more traditional puzzle mechanics, while maintaining Unova's flair. The icy slides and spinning platforms created a sense of momentum and unpredictability, testing the player's ability to adapt to shifting ground. Bryson, the leader, added depth to this challenge through his identity as both a martial artist and a former movie star. His dual career emphasized discipline, resilience, and the willingness to reinvent oneself. This layered characterization was unusual for a gym leader, suggesting that their roles extended far beyond their type specialties. Opelucid City's gym perhaps best embodied the theme of duality that defined Unova. Depending on the version of the game, players encountered either Drayden or Iris, each reflecting different aspects of dragon lore. The gym itself also shifted in design, appearing either modern and futuristic or traditional and historical. This duality reinforced the idea that Unova was a region of contrasts, where perspectives shaped reality. The dragons at the heart of these battles connected the gyms directly to the region's mythology, tying the leaders to its deepest themes. The final gym in Humalau City introduced Marlin, a leader with a laid-back attitude whose watery stage reflected relaxation and ease. Unlike some of the more intense gyms, his felt calm and leisurely, echoing the beachside atmosphere of his hometown. Yet beneath this easygoing exterior lay a serious challenge, as his strategies capitalized on resilience and endurance. Marlin's presence showed that even the most relaxed communities had their own strength, reinforcing the diversity of Unova's identities. What set these gyms apart collectively was their commitment to storytelling. Each one offered more than a test of battle. It was an expression of culture, philosophy, or lifestyle. They represented not only the types they specialized in, but the values of their communities. Striaton embodied hospitality, Necrene emphasized history, Castelia celebrated creativity, Nimbasa showcased performance, Driftvale highlighted industry, Mistralton embraced exploration, Icerus valued discipline, Opelucid represented duality, and Humalau celebrated balance and ease. Together, they painted a portrait of Unova as a region defined by diversity, experimentation, and meaning. Even the gym puzzles themselves carried symbolic weight. Honeycomb walls reflected the collective nature of bug types. Roller coasters represented the highs and lows of electricity, and icy slides embodied the unpredictability of winter. These mechanics were not arbitrary. They were carefully chosen to reflect the themes of their leaders. This level of integration reinforced the idea that Unova's gyms were not isolated challenges, but narrative experiences woven into the broader tapestry of the region. Obscure trivia deepens this appreciation. For example, Berg's gym in Black 2 and White 2 was redesigned into a cocoon-like structure filled with silk, representing transformation and growth. This evolution of his gym mirrored the metamorphosis of bug types themselves, tying character growth to gameplay progression. Similarly, Elasa's transition from a roller coaster to a fashion catwalk reflected her rising celebrity status, showing how gyms adapted alongside their leaders. These changes reinforced the sense that gyms were living institutions, evolving with the region's culture. Taken together, the gyms of Unova represented one of the most ambitious reimaginings of the concept in the series. They stood as cultural landmarks, educational institutions, performance spaces, and symbolic stages. By expanding what gyms could mean, the fifth generation redefined the role of these trials in the Pokémon world, ensuring that they were not only battles to be won, but stories to be experienced. At the peak of the journey through Unova lay the Pokémon League, a place that carried weight, not only as the ultimate test of strength, but also as a symbolic stage for the region's themes. Where earlier regions had presented the League as a straightforward gauntlet of battles, the fifth generation elevated the experience into something theatrical, philosophical, and deeply tied to the cultural identity of the region. The Elite Four chambers, in particular, stood out for their dramatic designs, each one transforming the act of battling into an exploration of ideas and imagery. The first of these chambers belonged to Chantal, the ghost-type specialist, whose room was designed like a vast library. Bookshelves towered into the distance, their spines forming endless walls of text. As the battle began, pages of a great tome turned, creating the sensation that the player had stepped directly into a story. This setting reflected Chantal's identity as a writer and storyteller, suggesting that her battles were not just contests of strength, but narratives in motion. The symbolism was clear. Ghost types, with their ties to memory and history, were linked to stories passed down across generations. Chantal's presence reminded players that lore itself was a kind of haunting, lingering long after events had ended. Grimsley's chamber carried a very different energy. Styled like a grand casino hall, it reflected both elegance and risk. Velvet chairs, ornate lamps, and patterned floors created the atmosphere of high-stakes gambling. Grimsley's dialogue reinforced this theme, often referencing risk, chance, and the unpredictability of battles. His focus on dark-type Pokémon tied neatly into this motif, as darkness represented both mystery and danger. In this setting, battling felt like a gamble where every move could shift the odds. The chamber's design emphasized that victory was never guaranteed, echoing the larger themes of truth and ideals by framing conflict as a matter of perspective and fortune. The Chamber of Caitlin, the psychic-type master, was perhaps the most surreal. Her room began with the trainer stepping onto a plush carpet surrounded by ornate pillars before being lifted into the air on a floating platform. This dreamlike ascent reflected Caitlin's identity as a refined psychic, lost in reverie and vision. The chamber's serenity contrasted sharply with the tension of battle, suggesting that psychic strength came not from aggression, but from calm mastery of the mind. Her connection to earlier games having first appeared in Sinnoh's Battle Frontier as a supporting character tied her arc across regions, reinforcing continuity and growth. For players, the sensation of rising into her chamber created an unforgettable impression, symbolizing both transcendence and the leap from mundane thought into extraordinary vision. The final chamber belonged to Marshall, the fighting-type leader, whose room embodied discipline and strength. Stone statues of martial artists lined the walls, and the player ascended stairs that reinforced the theme of climbing toward mastery. The atmosphere carried a sense of rigor, mirroring the straightforward yet relentless nature of fighting types. Marshall's dialogue often emphasized perseverance and training, connecting the act of battling to self-improvement. This chamber, though less flamboyant than others, resonated with a quiet power. It grounded the League in the philosophy that strength was not only about dominance, but about discipline and the willingness to endure. Taken together, these chambers elevated the Elite Four into more than opponents. They became symbolic reflections of culture, chance, dreams, and discipline. The experience of facing them felt theatrical, each chamber offering a stage where design and dialogue worked in harmony. It was a leap forward from earlier regions, where Elite Four settings had often been simple rooms or elemental backdrops. In Unova, each encounter felt like stepping into a philosophy, reinforcing the region's identity as one defined by ideas as much as battles. The champion of Unova further emphasized this ambition. In the original black and white versions, the role was held by Alder, a wandering trainer whose life story carried both triumph and tragedy. Unlike previous champions who were often depicted as aloof or purely powerful, Alder was deeply humanized. He had once battled at the peak of strength, but had been broken by the loss of his partner Pokémon. This grief shaped his worldview, leaving him with a philosophy centered on living in the moment and finding joy in the bonds between humans and Pokémon. His presence as champion tied the themes of mortality, resilience, and empathy directly into the heart of the region's league. Alder's battles reflected his diversity, with a team that showcased a wide range of types rather than a singular specialty. This design choice reinforced his identity as a wandering sage, someone who had seen all aspects of the world. His dialogue encouraged players to think about their journey not as a conquest, but as a series of shared experiences. In this way, the champion's role became less about ultimate dominance and more about reflection, teaching players to value the intangible aspects of their adventure. In Black 2 and White 2, the champion's role shifted to Iris, who represented a very different kind of leadership. Youthful, energetic, and filled with optimism, Iris embodied the future of Unova. Her presence as champion symbolized renewal and continuity, showing how the region embraced both tradition and progression. The battle with Iris was staged in a grand hall filled with stained glass, an environment that reflected both her dragon-type mastery and her role as a beacon of new generations. Where Alder had emphasized experience and reflection, Iris emphasized vitality and hope. Together, these two champions illustrated the dual nature of Unova, one rooted in wisdom of the past, the other in promise of the future. Obscure details about the League further enriched its role. For example, the Elite Four could be challenged in any order, breaking from the linear progression of earlier games. This freedom symbolized the region's emphasis on choice and perspective, reinforcing its philosophical themes. Another subtle detail was the shifting camera angles as the player ascended toward the champion, adding a cinematic flair that reflected the grandeur of the moment. These design choices showed how the League was not only a mechanical challenge, but a narrative climax, tying together the themes of duality, perspective, and ideals. The League also intersected with the story of N, who disrupted the traditional flow of the champion battle in the original games. After defeating the Elite Four, players found that N had defeated Alder and claimed the title of champion himself. This narrative twist was unprecedented, reframing the final battle not as a clash with a static champion, but as a confrontation with the philosophical heart of the story. The subsequent descent of his castle around the League further emphasized the theatrical nature of Unova's climax, blending architecture, narrative, and mechanics into one unforgettable sequence. This disruption highlighted how the League in Unova was not only a test of strength, but a narrative tool. By allowing N and later Getsis to invade the sacred space of the League, the story suggested that even the highest institutions could be challenged by ideology. It reinforced the theme that truth and ideals were not abstract but active, capable of reshaping the most fundamental traditions. For players, this twist elevated the League into one of the most memorable climaxes in the franchise, blending personal growth, philosophical debate, and spectacle. The post-game presence of the League also carried meaning. In Black 2 and White 2, rematches allowed players to face stronger teams, reflecting the passage of time and the growth of the region. The inclusion of Iris as champion in these sequels tied directly to the narrative theme of renewal, reinforcing the idea that leadership was not fixed, but evolving. This continuity of growth echoed the broader message of Unova, that the region was a place of contrasts, progress, and ever-changing perspectives. In its entirety, the League of Unova stood as a culmination of the generation's ambition. Its chambers embodied ideas, its champions carried philosophy, and its disruptions reshaped tradition. It was more than a battleground. It was a theater of thought, a cultural monument, and a narrative climax. By weaving philosophy into mechanics, the fifth generation ensured that the League was remembered not only for its difficulty, but for its meaning. It was the perfect culmination of a journey through a region that sought to redefine what Pokémon could be. The journey through Unova did not end when the champion was defeated. In fact, the post-game of the fifth generation was among the richest and most ambitious in the franchise's history, layering new challenges, hidden areas, and cross-regional connections that extended the adventure far beyond the credits. It was here that the region most clearly demonstrated its role as both an innovator and a bridge to the larger Pokémon world. One of the most remarkable additions in the sequels, Black 2 and White 2, was the Pokémon World Tournament, situated in Driftvale City. This facility redefined what post-game content could be. Instead of limiting players to battling local trainers, it opened the doors to an international competition that brought back leaders and champions from earlier regions. For the first time, fans could face familiar figures such as Brock, Misty, and Lance, not as distant memories, but as tangible opponents. This nostalgic feature tied Unova directly to the legacy of the franchise, reinforcing its identity as a region that both embraced the new and respected the old. The design of the tournament was steeped in spectacle. Players entered an arena filled with cheering crowds, flashing lights, and tournament brackets that mirrored real-world sporting events. The structure of the matches was flexible, offering single, double, triple, and rotation battles, ensuring that players could engage with every format the series had introduced. This diversity of battle styles reflected Unova's broader theme of experimentation, reminding players that the region thrived on variety and innovation. Obscure details about the World Tournament highlight just how carefully it was crafted. For example, each returning leader or champion was given updated dialogue that reflected their personalities and histories, ensuring that these cameos felt authentic rather than hollow. Some even referenced events from earlier games, tying the continuity of the series together in subtle ways. These touches transformed the tournament into more than just a battle facility. It was a celebration of the franchise itself, a tribute to its history and its fans. Parallel to the spectacle of the World Tournament was the stark challenge of the Black Tower and White Tree Hollow. These version-exclusive facilities, located in Black City and White Forest respectively, offered some of the most grueling battles in the series. Players navigated multiple floors filled with trainers, each level presenting escalating difficulty. Unlike traditional battle facilities, these towers required the player to engage in extended gauntlets, where endurance mattered as much as strategy. The sense of climbing ever higher or delving ever deeper reinforced the themes of persistence and growth that defined Unova's journey. Black Tower emphasized sleek, futuristic design with glowing pathways and mechanical aesthetics that echoed the city's broader theme of progress and industry. White Tree Hollow, by contrast, was organic and natural, filled with towering trees and leafy walkways that mirrored the harmony of nature. These visual contrasts highlighted the duality at the heart of the region, once again reinforcing the balance between tradition and modernity. The choice to make them version exclusive added further weight, ensuring that no single player could experience the full breadth of the content without trading or replaying. This encouraged community discussion and sharing, tying the experience back to the social roots of the franchise. Obscure trivia reveals that the trainers in these facilities were scaled to the player's progress, creating a sense of adaptive difficulty rarely seen in earlier generations. By the time the player reached the top, they would face the powerful character Benga, the grandson of Alder. This narrative connection ensured that the challenge was not just mechanical but also personal, tying the grueling climb to the broader story of Unova's champions and their legacies. Beyond these headline features, the postgame also expanded the map itself. Areas that had been inaccessible during the main story opened up, inviting exploration into new corners of the region. Routes like the Marine Tube, a massive glass tunnel beneath the sea, showcased technical innovation, allowing players to watch aquatic Pokémon swim overhead as they walked. This visual marvel tied the sense of wonder back to the series' core theme of connection with nature, while also emphasizing the developers' ambition to push the limits of the hardware. Undella Bay became another focal point of post-game exploration. Here, players could dive into the abyssal ruins, uncovering ancient treasures and cryptic inscriptions. These ruins referenced an ancient king and hinted at ties to the mythical figure Arceus, weaving connections between Unova and the broader mythology of the Pokémon world. The fact that these inscriptions could be partially translated but never fully contextualized gave the ruins an air of mystery, ensuring that speculation and fan theories continued long after the game's release. The presence of Cynthia in Undella Town also carried symbolic weight. As the champion of Sinnoh, her inclusion in Unova tied the regions together, reinforcing the idea that the world of Pokémon was interconnected. Her presence in a villa overlooking the sea suggested both leisure and continuity, as though even champions sought rest and reflection between journeys. Battling her again reminded players of their past adventures, while also reinforcing the theme that legacy and continuity mattered as much as discovery. The seasonal system also played a larger role in the post-game. While it had already influenced routes and encounters throughout the main story, its presence in areas like Undella Town was particularly noticeable. In summer, the town bustled with wealthy visitors, while in other seasons it grew quiet, almost deserted. This fluctuation reinforced the idea that the region was alive, tied to natural rhythms and cycles. It gave the postgame a sense of impermanence, as though the world shifted with or without the player's presence. Obscure side quests enriched the postgame even further. For instance, the Strange House tied directly into the Lunar Wing, an item associated with the mythical creature Cresselia. This link suggested connections between dreams, nightmares, and the ghostly phenomena scattered across the region. Another example was the opportunity to capture Regigigas by transferring the Regis from earlier games, tying Unova's post-game directly to its predecessors. These quests emphasized the interconnectedness of the series, rewarding players who carried their adventures forward across generations. Even the smaller encounters carried depth. The Rich's family of Undella offered daily battles that reflected their wealth and the player's persistence, while the opportunity to face Alder again provided closure to his arc. These details showed that the postgame was not merely filler content, but an extension of the region's narrative, filled with stories and personalities that added texture to the world. Taken together, the postgame of Unova represented one of the most ambitious expansions the franchise had attempted. It offered spectacle in the World Tournament, grueling challenge in the Black Tower and White Tree Hollow, mystery in the Abyssal Ruins, continuity through Cynthia, and atmosphere in seasonal shifts. Each feature tied back to the region's themes of duality, perspective, and connection. It reinforced the idea that Unova was not just a stage for one story, but a living world that continued to evolve after the credits rolled. Perhaps most importantly, these post-game features ensured that the journey did not end. They invited players to linger, to explore, and to reflect. They rewarded dedication with hidden treasures, legendary encounters, and philosophical connections. They reminded fans that in Unova, discovery was never complete. There was always another story waiting, another secret to uncover, another challenge to face. In this way, the post-game embodied the very spirit of the region, ensuring that its legacy would endure as one of the most daring and rewarding chapters in the history of Pokémonday. Legends have always served as the backbone of regional identity, and nowhere was this truer than in Unova. The region's mythology was richer and more philosophical than most, weaving together stories of dragons, guardians, and mythical beings that embodied ideals, truths, and balance. These figures were not only rare encounters, but cultural cornerstones, tied deeply into the architecture, dialogue, and even the philosophical struggles that defined the region's narrative. At the heart of this mythos were the twin dragons, Reshiram and Zekrom. Their origins stretched back to an ancient time when two heroes sought to shape the region. Once a single being, they split into two in order to embody opposing philosophies, one tied to truth, the other to ideals. Their battles tore the land apart, leaving scars that endured into the present. This division was not merely physical but symbolic, reminding players that conflicting perspectives could never be reconciled without sacrifice. The fact that players encountered one or the other, depending on the version they played, underscored this theme of perspective, showing that no single journey captured the entire truth of the story. The third dragon, Kyurem, stood as the void left behind when the original being was divided. Unlike its counterparts, it embodied incompleteness, emptiness, and loss. Its icy form suggested desolation, and its lair in the giant chasm reflected a place where even nature seemed subdued. The introduction of fusion forms in the sequels, Black Kyurem and White Kyurem, symbolized the potential for reconciliation, though never a perfect one. These fusions carried both the power and the tension of their counterparts, suggesting that unity was possible, but fragile. This myth of division and reconciliation was one of the deepest explorations of philosophy ever woven into a Pokémon narrative. Beyond the dragons, the Swords of Justice formed another key pillar of Unova's lore. Cobalion, Terrakion, and Virizion were inspired by the musketeers of European literature, each embodying virtues of leadership, resilience, and compassion. Their narrative tied them to acts of protection, defending Pokémon from human harm during times of conflict. The trio's design emphasized nobility, with armor-like features and stately forms that reinforced their role as guardians. Their presence in the region reflected themes of justice and defense, grounding Unova's myths in morality as well as philosophy. The fourth member of this group, Keldeo, embodied youthful potential. Unlike the others, it represented a student or apprentice figure, learning from its mentors before striking out on its own. Its story emphasized growth, transformation, and courage, especially through its unique form, change into the resolute form, once it mastered its sacred sword technique. This detail tied the myth to themes of maturity, showing that growth was not merely about power, but about understanding responsibility. The fact that Keldeo was distributed primarily through events further emphasized its role as a special figure, one that symbolized rare opportunity and personal growth. Another significant legendary figure was Victini, known as the embodiment of victory. Located within the Liberty Garden event, it symbolized success and triumph, traits woven into its very design. Its small stature contrasted with its mythic status, reinforcing the idea that greatness could emerge from unlikely places. Lore suggested that anyone who befriended Victini would achieve victory, tying it to themes of luck, destiny, and hope. The exclusivity of its event distribution meant that not all players could encounter it, reinforcing its role as a rare and treasured presence in the mythology of Unova. Meloetta added another layer of cultural identity to the region. Associated with music and performance, it carried two forms, aria and pirouette, that reflected contrasting artistic expressions. Its design echoed the themes of Nimbasa City and the region's focus on culture, entertainment, and performance. Through song, Meloetta was said to calm spirits and inspire emotions, making it as much a muse as a mythical figure. Its role in event distributions tied it to interactivity, as players needed to unlock its second form through specific moves, reinforcing its identity as a being of transformation and artistry. Genesect stood as one of the darkest mythical creations in the franchise. Said to be a prehistoric insect revived and weaponized by Team Plasma, it embodied themes of technological manipulation and the consequences of tampering with nature. Its cannon-like design reflected this artificial enhancement, contrasting sharply with the organic nobility of other mythical beings. Genesect represented one of the rare times that the games addressed themes of genetic experimentation so explicitly, making it both fascinating and unsettling. Its inclusion emphasized Unova's willingness to confront controversial ideas, tying mythology to questions about science, ethics, and the manipulation of life. Obscure details about these mythical figures reveal just how carefully they were integrated into the region's fabric. Victini's association with Liberty Garden tied it to themes of freedom and independence, reflecting the symbolism of its island location. Meloetta's design drew inspiration from treble clefs and musical notes, making its form a literal embodiment of sound. Genesect's story linked it to the fossils of earlier eras, suggesting that even the most ancient beings could be reshaped by modern ambition. These small touches grounded each mythical figure in both cultural symbolism and philosophical meaning. The way these figures were distributed also reinforced their role as myths. Unlike legendary dragons encountered through the story, many mythical beings required special events or unique conditions, echoing the exclusivity and rarity of myths in real-world cultures. Players who obtained them often felt a sense of privilege, as though they had touched something beyond the ordinary scope of the game. This method of distribution tied gameplay mechanics to the very idea of myth, reinforcing the sense that these figures were not just creatures, but symbols of rarity, exclusivity, and wonder. Even within the main story, the presence of legends carried heavy narrative weight. The confrontation with Reshiram, or Zekrom, was not framed as a typical legendary battle, but as the culmination of philosophical conflict. The setting of Dragon Spiral Tower, the orchestration of music, and the dialogue of N elevated the encounter into something almost spiritual. Similarly, the post-game exploration of Kuram's lair tied desolation directly into gameplay, immersing players in the experience of emptiness. These encounters were not only about catching powerful creatures, but about stepping into myths, living them firsthand. Taken together, the legendary and mythical figures of Unova ensured that the region carried a weight unlike any other. They embodied truth, ideals, justice, victory, music, transformation, and the consequences of scientific hubris. Each figure was carefully tied to geography, culture, and philosophy, reinforcing the idea that Unova was a region defined by more than just battles. It was a land where stories lived in ruins, where dragons shaped the horizon, and where myths whispered through music and memory. The legacy of Unova extended beyond its story and geography into the heart of competitive battling. Generation 5 reshaped the way players approach strategy, introducing new mechanics, abilities, and Pokémon that influenced the metagame for years. For many fans, this generation marked the beginning of modern competitive play, with innovations that emphasized diversity, creativity, and unpredictability. One of the defining shifts was the introduction of the team preview mechanic. For the first time in the series, players could see their opponent's full team before a match began. This changed the psychology of battling dramatically. Previously, surprise had been a central element, as trainers never knew what might appear until it was revealed mid-battle. With Team Preview, strategy shifted toward prediction, bluffing, and the careful choice of which Pokémon to lead with. This addition made battles more about planning and reading the opponent, aligning with Unova's broader theme of perspective and ideals. Another major innovation was the expansion of weather-based strategies. Generation 5 supercharged permanent weather metas by giving sun and rain to non-legendary setters via hidden abilities, meaning that conditions like sun, rain, sandstorm, and hail could persist indefinitely once triggered. This gave rise to entire archetypes of teams built around weather dominance. Politoed, with its drizzle ability, brought endless rain, empowering water-type moves and abilities like Swift Swim. Ninetales, with drought, provided infinite sunlight, enhancing fire-type attacks and strategies centered on growth. Tyranitar and Hippowdon continued their roles as sandstorm setters, while Abomasnow's Hail offered niche but dangerous strategies. This weather dominance reshaped competitive play, as entire metagames revolved around which weather condition could be established and maintained. Matches often became contests of control, where players swapped in and out to assert their weather and disrupt their opponents. It created an ecosystem where synergy mattered more than ever, as teams had to be built around not only types and roles, but also climate. The generation became infamous for these weather wars, remembered as one of the most volatile and dynamic periods in competitive history. Obscure strategies emerged from this environment. For example, Volcarona thrived in sun, its quiver dance boosting its stats, while sunlight enhanced its fiery attacks. Ferrothorn found a niche in rain, where the dampened fire damage allowed it to wall opponents more effectively. Sand teams often revolved around Excadrill, whose Sand Rush ability doubled its speed in Sandstorm, making it one of the most feared sweepers of the era. These interactions highlighted how weather not only boosted moves, but fundamentally reshaped the viability of entire species. Generation 5 also introduced new battle formats, expanding the tactical landscape. Triple battles allowed trainers to field 3 Pokémon at once, with positioning affecting which moves could hit which targets. This added a layer of spatial strategy, as placement determined the flow of attacks. Rotation battles offered a different twist, where 3 Pokemon could be rotated in and out on a single active slot, emphasizing mind games and prediction. While these formats never became mainstream in competitive communities, they showcased the experimental spirit of Unova, reflecting the region's theme of diversity and innovation. Abilities introduced in this generation also had lasting impacts. The contrary ability, most famously associated with Superior in later releases, flipped stat changes to their opposite effects, turning moves like Leaf Storm from self-debilitating to self-empowering. Prankster, tied to Pokemon like Whimsicott, gave priority to status moves, enabling strategies centered around disruption and support. Multiscale, associated with Dragonite, reduced damage taken when at full health, making it a formidable tank and setup sweeper. These abilities demonstrated how a single mechanic could redefine a Pokemon's role, transforming it from ordinary to exceptional. Moves introduced in Unova further shifted the landscape. Scald became infamous for its combination of decent power and a high chance to burn, making it both offensive and defensive at once. Volt Switch and U-Turn empowered pivoting strategies, allowing players to maintain momentum by dealing damage while switching to a new teammate. Knockoff gained prominence as item-based strategies became more central, making item removal one of the most disruptive tactics in play. Quiver Dance, as seen with Volcarona, became one of the most potent boosting moves ever introduced, cementing its user as a perennial threat. The competitive scene also saw the rise of entry hazard control as a central element. Stealth Rock, introduced in earlier generations, continued to dominate, but Unova brought new tools for hazard stacking and removal. Ferrothorn's ability to set both Spikes and Stealth Rock made it a cornerstone of many defensive teams. Rapid Spin remained the primary removal tool, but its distribution was limited, forcing players to weigh the value of hazard control carefully. These dynamics made hazard warfare a defining aspect of battles, as layers of spikes or toxic spikes could slowly chip away at opponents over time. Obscure trivia from this era highlights just how influential these changes were. For instance, Excadrill was so dominant in sand that it was banned from competitive play during parts of Generation 5's history, only to return later under stricter conditions. Similarly, the presence of permanent weather was so disruptive that later generations altered the mechanic, limiting weather effects to a finite number of turns unless extended by items. These adjustments reflected how Unova's innovations had lasting repercussions, forcing the competitive community and developers alike to rethink balance. Beyond mechanics, the competitive culture of the time also thrived on experimentation. The sheer number of new Pokemon, over 150 entirely fresh additions, meant that players had an enormous pool of options to explore. Some species quickly became staples of high-level play, while others found niches in lower tiers. This diversity kept the metagame vibrant as strategies evolved and adapted to counter emerging threats. It was an environment defined by flux, fitting for a region whose mythology revolved around opposing perspectives and shifting ideals. The introduction of Dream World abilities further complicated the landscape. By connecting to an online feature, players could unlock hidden abilities that often transformed a Pokemon's role. For example, Politude's Drizzle was only available through the Dream World, yet it reshaped the entire competitive scene. The combination of online connectivity and gameplay innovation demonstrated how the 5th generation bridged in-game content with external systems, expanding the boundaries of what competitive play could include. Even aesthetic and atmospheric choices influenced competitive memory. The battle backgrounds in Unova, with their dynamic camera angles and more elaborate animations, gave battles a heightened sense of intensity. Double and triple battles showcased the full scale of the new engine, making even casual matches feel more cinematic. These details underscored the developer's ambition to make battles not only mechanical, but also experiential, reinforcing the sense that the region was a turning point in the franchise's history. In retrospect, the competitive era of Unova is remembered as one of both chaos and creativity. Weather wars dominated, hazards defined strategies, and abilities reshaped the tier lists. Yet within this turbulence lay the heart of the generation's identity: experimentation, duality, and the pursuit of new ideals. It was a time when battles felt less predictable, when the outcome could swing wildly based on climate, synergy, or a single surprising move. This unpredictability mirrored the region's mythology, where truth and ideals clashed endlessly, creating both conflict and possibility. For players who lived through this era, Unova's competitive scene was unforgettable. It taught lessons about adaptation, foresight, and the balance of risk and reward. It revealed how deeply mechanics could influence identity, showing that a region was not defined only by its story or geography, but also by the strategies it inspired. In this way, the competitive history of Generation 5 became an essential chapter in the broader legacy of Pokémon, ensuring that Unova would be remembered not only as a region of myth, but as a crucible of strategy, innovation, and change. The region of Unova stood out, not only for its bold narrative and competitive innovations, but also for the sheer artistry of its world building. Unlike earlier regions that drew heavily from Japanese geography and culture, Unova expanded the franchise's horizon, reaching across the globe for inspiration. Its heart lay in New York City, but its scope extended into global mythologies, art, and architecture. This made it a cultural mosaic, reflecting both the modern energy of a metropolis and the timeless echoes of folklore. The most obvious connection was Castelia City, whose skyscrapers and bustling docks mirrored Manhattan. Its grid-like streets, harbors, and sense of vertical scale conveyed a modernity that no earlier Pokémon city had attempted. Even the inclusion of art galleries and corporate offices reflected the cultural identity of New York, blending creativity and commerce. The city itself became a character, overwhelming in size yet filled with hidden details. Every alley, side street, and office space emphasized that Unova was designed to feel lived in, urban, and ambitious. Nimbasa City extended this theme of cultural vibrancy, acting as the entertainment hub of the region. Its amusement parks, musical halls, and stadiums drew directly from New York's reputation for Broadway, sports, and nightlife. The Ferris wheel became one of the most iconic features, offering not only a ride, but a moment of storytelling tied to the character N. This blending of spectacle and intimacy reflected the real-world spirit of entertainment districts, where grand performances exist alongside private experiences. The Pokémon musical was another cultural experiment, tying battling companions to themes of artistry, costume, and showmanship. Though divisive among fans, it underscored Unova's ambition to broaden the scope of what Pokémon could represent. Mistralton City drew inspiration from aviation culture, reflecting the air travel that defines modern global cities. The enormous hangars and runways connected directly to New York's airports, transforming the city into a symbol of connection and exploration. Skyla's identity as a pilot reinforced this theme, tying the spirit of adventure into both the city and the battles within it. Aviation became not just a background element, but a metaphor for freedom, ambition, and the reach of human and Pokemon partnerships. On the other end of the spectrum, smaller towns in Unova reflected quieter cultural details. Floxacy and Aspertia carried the identity of rural America, with wide fields, farmhouses, and a sense of openness. Their inclusion balanced the metropolitan energy of Castilia, reminding players that New York's identity is not only skyscrapers, but also countryside and small communities. This duality reinforced the idea that Unova was not a caricature, but a layered region, reflecting both the urban and the rural. The artistic influences extended to architecture. Opelucid City's two versions, one futuristic, one traditional, reflected the tension between modern progress and ancient heritage. The futuristic version evoked sleek skyscrapers and neon lights, while the traditional version mirrored old stonework and medieval motifs. This duality was not random. It reflected the cultural push and pull of New York, where historic neighborhoods stand alongside cutting-edge developments. The city's identity shifted depending on perspective, reinforcing the broader theme of truth versus ideals. Even bridges carried artistic weight. Sky Arrow Bridge, inspired by the Brooklyn Bridge, was designed not just as infrastructure, but as a statement of ambition. Its scale, camera angles, and sense of enormity reflected the grandeur of modern engineering. Village Bridge, by contrast, emphasized culture and intimacy, with musicians, food vendors, and daily life woven into its design. These artistic contrasts made bridges more than simple crossings. They became cultural landmarks, each carrying a different meaning. The Pokemon themselves also reflected diverse cultural inspirations. Zoroark, with its illusionary abilities, drew from Kitsune folklore in Japan, but its marketing in Unova emphasized trickery and showmanship akin to stage magicians. Chandelure's Gothic design reflected European art and architecture, tying ghostly lore to candlelit halls and Gothic chandeliers. Volcarona carried echoes of solar deities, its myth that it could replace the sun, reflecting ancient cultural fears of darkness and reverence for light. These designs demonstrated how the developers reached beyond one cultural sphere, pulling from global traditions to craft a diverse roster. Obscure design details highlight just how intentional these influences were. For example, the Kami trio Tornadus, Thunderous, and Landorus drew inspiration from Shinto deities tied to wind, thunder, and harvest. Their designs fused traditional Japanese iconography with modern cloud imagery, bridging past and present. Meanwhile, the Swords of Justice were rooted in European literature, showing how Unova blended global myths rather than restricting itself to one tradition. This fusion reflected the melting pot identity of New York itself, where diverse cultures coexisted and influenced one another. Artistic experimentation also extended to music. Unova's soundtrack incorporated genres rarely heard in earlier games, from jazz-inspired tracks in Castelia to carnival-like energy in Nimbasa. Even smaller towns had unique musical themes, often layered with instruments that reflected cultural moods. Village Bridge stood out in particular, as its soundtrack expanded with each musician the player discovered. This blending of exploration and sound created one of the most atmospheric experiences in the series, showing how music could tell stories just as powerfully as visuals. The design of gyms reflected artistic identity as well. Berg's cocoon-like gym in Black 2 and White 2, filled with silk and light, reflected themes of metamorphosis, directly connecting to both bug-type lore and the artistic process of transformation. Elisa's gym, evolving from a roller coaster to a fashion runway, mirrored her rise in celebrity status, blending entertainment culture with personal growth. These artistic choices were more than aesthetic. They reinforced the idea that gyms were not isolated puzzles, but cultural expressions tied to their leaders. Obscure trivia ties Unova's artistry even deeper to its real-world roots. For example, the name of Castelia likely derived from castellum, meaning fortress, reflecting both the towering strength of its skyscrapers and its role as a cultural stronghold. Striaton's Café Gym echoed the European coffeehouse tradition, where social spaces doubled as intellectual hubs. Even Isurus, with its snowy landscape and icy gym, reflected rural northern influences, tying the region to broader cultural geographies. The duality of the region extended into its very names. Many towns were named after cloud formations, linking the geography to the sky. This subtle artistic choice reinforced the central role of the heavens, both in the myths of the dragons and in the literal skies crossed by bridges, plains, and towers. It was another example of how artistry in Unova was layered, blending language, architecture, and philosophy into one seamless identity. Taken together, the cultural and artistic inspirations of Unova made it a landmark in the franchise. It was the first region to step beyond Japan's borders, yet it carried the spirit of diversity and duality into every corner of its design. From skyscrapers to ruins, from musicals to ruins beneath the sea, the region reflected both the vibrancy of modern culture and the timeless pull of myth. Its artistry ensured that the journey was not only about discovery, but about immersion in a world where every detail carried meaning. The journey through Unova was defined not only by its landscapes and legendary figures, but also by the people who inhabited it. More than any previous generation, this region emphasized character-driven storytelling, weaving supporting figures into the narrative in ways that reflected philosophy, growth, and cultural complexity. These characters carried weight beyond their immediate roles, shaping the tone of the region and providing perspectives that deepened the player's understanding of the world around them. One of the most significant of these characters was Alder, the wandering champion introduced in the original Black and White. Unlike champions of earlier generations, who were often aloof or solely focused on strength, Alder was defined by loss and resilience. His story revealed that he had once reached the pinnacle of battling, only to fall into grief after the death of his partner Pokémon. This backstory, though subtle, gave him an uncommon depth. He wandered the region, offering wisdom to young trainers, embodying the idea that power was not only about winning, but also about finding meaning in bonds. In this way, Alder represented a kind of sage, a figure of experience who challenged players to think about the emotional core of their journeys. Alder's dialogue carried a weight rarely seen in earlier games. He often spoke about living in the moment, embracing joy, and finding value in the connections between people and Pokémon. This contrasted with the grandiose ambitions of villains like Getsis, grounding the story in themes of humility and compassion. Even his design, with untamed hair and a flowing cloak, suggested movement and impermanence, reinforcing his role as a wanderer rather than a ruler. Though his time as champion eventually passed to Iris in the sequels, his influence remained. Alder's philosophy ensured that his presence was felt not only in battles, but in the spirit of the region itself. Alongside Alder stood two rivals, Bianca and Chirin, whose journeys intertwined with the players in ways that reflected growth and identity. Bianca, cheerful and slightly scatterbrained, represented a softer form of strength. Her struggles with self-doubt and her protective father created a storyline that emphasized independence and personal growth. She was not defined solely by competition, but by her journey toward self-confidence, showing players that strength could take many forms. In later games, she matured into a researcher's assistant, symbolizing how roles evolve and how passion for Pokémon could manifest outside of battles. Charon, by contrast, embodied discipline and ambition. Analytical and driven, he constantly sought to measure his strength against the players. His focus on logic and efficiency often contrasted with Bianca's warmth, creating a dynamic that mirrored Unova's themes of contrast and duality. In Black 2 and White 2, Charon's progression into a gym leader illustrated maturity and responsibility, showing how rivals could grow into mentors. His arc underscored the idea that journeys were not static. They shaped individuals in ways that rippled outward, transforming them into figures of authority and guidance for the next generation. Colress was another character whose role illuminated the philosophical ambitions of Unova. Introduced in Black 2 and White 2, he represented the theme of scientific curiosity, unbound by morality. A researcher fascinated by the potential of Pokémon, he allied temporarily with Team Plasma, not out of malice, but out of a desire to see how bonds could be pushed to their limits. His cold demeanor and futuristic design reflected his obsession with progress and technology. Yet his presence complicated the narrative, reminding players that not all antagonists were driven by cruelty. Some were driven by questions, however dangerous. Colress stood as a mirror to the player, asking what it truly meant to draw out a Pokemon's strength. Ghetsis, by contrast, embodied manipulation and hypocrisy. Unlike N, whose ideology stemmed from conviction, Ghetsis used the rhetoric of liberation to consolidate power for himself. His speeches about freeing Pokémon masked his desire for domination, making him one of the darkest villains in the franchise. His manipulation of N, raising him to be a figurehead for Plasma's cause, added layers of cruelty to his character. The final confrontation with Ghetsis revealed his true nature, cementing him as a figure of deceit and exploitation. His presence reminded players that not all philosophies were genuine, and that some ideologies were tools of control. The 7 sages of Team Plasma added another layer of depth. Each sage represented a facet of Plasma's ideology, speaking with tones of authority, discipline, or mysticism. Their dispersal across the region after the climax of Black and White created a post-game quest that tied Plasma's philosophy to geography. Tracking them down emphasized the lingering impact of ideology, showing that even after Ghetsis' defeat, his influence remained. These sages reinforced the idea that philosophy was not confined to leaders alone, but could spread through networks of followers and believers. Even minor characters carried symbolic weight. The subway bosses, Ingo and Emmett, turned the battle subway into more than a facility, embodying themes of rhythm and repetition. Their dialogue and mirrored designs reflected the symmetry of their world, emphasizing patterns and structure. Elisa's role extended beyond her gym, as her encouragement of Bianca influenced a character's growth in ways that tied gyms to personal stories. Clay's dialogue about business and practicality revealed cultural differences within the region, showing how ideology was not only grand, but also everyday. Obscure trivia about these characters deepens their significance. For example, Charon's name is derived from a word meaning black in Bulgarian, fitting the duality theme of the region alongside Bianca, whose name means white in Italian. Calres's name is thought to be a contraction of cold and resolute, reflecting his personality and philosophy. Even the seven sages drew inspiration from historical councils of advisors, reinforcing the idea that they were ideological rather than purely militant. These linguistic and cultural details enriched the storytelling, weaving subtle meaning into every name. The supporting cast also reflected the experimentation of the generation. By tying rivals, mentors, and villains to evolving roles, the games emphasized that journeys were not isolated events, but parts of a broader continuum. Bianca's shift into research, Charon's rise to gym leadership, Iris's progression to champion, and Alder's transition to wanderer all reinforced the idea that life moved forward. Characters changed, roles evolved, and authority passed from one generation to the next. This dynamic storytelling made Unova feel alive, as though it was not only the player who grew, but the entire world around them. Together, these side characters ensured that the story of Unova was remembered not only for its legendary dragons or philosophical conflicts, but for the people who lived within it. Their struggles, ambitions, and transformations gave the region its soul, turning abstract ideals into personal stories. They showed that every perspective mattered, whether it came from a wandering sage, a doubtful rival, a curious scientist, or a manipulative villain. In this way, the side characters of Unova embodied the richness of the region, ensuring that its narrative was as human as it was mythical. One of the most striking qualities of Unova was the way its geography told stories. Beyond the major cities and routes, the region contained corners that spoke through atmosphere, ruins, or cryptic encounters. These places often existed at the edge of the main narrative, but they carried weight equal to the central story, enriching the region's mythology and immersing players in a world where exploration rewarded curiosity with mystery. Liberty Garden stood out as one of the most unique locations in the entire franchise. Accessible only through an event, the island was reached by boat from Castelia City. Upon arrival, players were greeted by a quiet park with a lighthouse towering overhead. Yet this tranquility hid conflict, as Team Plasma members had occupied the island, searching for the mythical being Victini. The battle against them carried an unusual tension, with the stakes centered not around theft or domination, but around the possession of a rare figure tied to victory itself. The design of Liberty Garden reflected themes of freedom and independence, echoing real-world landmarks while grounding the myth of Victini in a place of solitude and resilience. The desert resort and its hidden relic castle provided another layer of lore. Situated in the midst of shifting sands, the area evoked mystery and antiquity. The relic castle, buried beneath the dunes, revealed itself as a labyrinth of crumbling stone and forgotten halls. Within its depths lurked Volcarona, presented not as a legendary, but as a guardian deity, its lore suggesting that it once replaced the sun during times of darkness. The castle's hieroglyph-like carvings hinted at a civilization long vanished, leaving behind symbols of reverence and ritual. By tying a powerful figure to this ruin, the designers made geography itself into a storybook, where every cracked wall whispered of past worship. Obscure details deepened the mystery of the relic castle. Items found within referenced ancient kings and ties to plates, hinting at the broader mythology of Arceus. Yet the inscriptions never told a complete story, leaving space for speculation. This ambiguity made the castle a fertile ground for fan theories, many of which connected its lore to the broader world of Pokémonday. Some speculated that the ruins' kings may have been contemporaries of other mythic figures, while others saw the castle as a bridge between truth and ideals. Whatever the case, the desert resort reminded players that the past of Unova was as significant as its present, and that ruins carried voices as powerful as those of the living. The marvelous bridge carried a subtler kind of lore. Sleek and modern in design, it appeared at first as a practical crossing between regions, yet hidden within its length was a ghostly encounter, a girl who appeared briefly before vanishing if approached. This chilling detail echoed the ghostly presence in the strange house, reinforcing the idea that the supernatural lingered across Unova. The girl's silence left her origins a mystery, sparking speculation about whether she tied into the lunar wing, dreams, or forgotten tragedies. By placing this encounter on a busy bridge, the developers emphasized how the uncanny could intrude even into modern spaces, blending the ordinary with the unsettling. Village Bridge offered the opposite kind of experience, steeped in culture rather than mystery. Its layered soundtrack, enhanced by musicians discovered throughout the area, made it one of the most atmospheric locations in the series. Dialogue from its residents added depth, from cooks preparing noodles to locals relaxing by the river. A small basketball court and fishing spots tied the bridge to daily life, showing that the region valued more than battles and legends. This blending of sound, dialogue, and environment turned Village Bridge into a living community rather than a simple crossing, rewarding players who lingered to experience its rhythm. The abyssal ruins beneath Undella Bay pushed mystery to its extreme. Accessible only through the use of diving mechanics, the ruins presented an ancient labyrinth filled with treasures and inscriptions. The text referenced an ancient king and spoke of wealth and devotion, but like the relic castle, the full story was never made clear. Items tied to plates hinted once again at connections to broader mythology, suggesting that the ruins may have been built by those who revered Arceus. The obscurity of the inscriptions, which could be translated but not fully contextualized, left players with fragments of a story rather than a conclusion. This design choice turned the abyssal ruins into one of the most enigmatic areas in the entire series, where mystery itself was the reward. Undella Town, sitting at the edge of these ruins, reinforced the themes of transience and impermanence. During summer, the town bustled with wealthy visitors, filling the villas with life and conversation. In other seasons, it became eerily quiet, its beaches empty, and its atmosphere subdued. This fluctuation reminded players that regions were not static. They shifted with cycles, seasons, and human activity. Undella carried the feeling of a resort town tied to rhythms beyond the player's control, echoing the real-world ebb and flow of seasonal tourism. The strange house tied supernatural lore to tangible items. Its rearranging furniture and eerie music made it one of the most unsettling locations in the series, culminating in the appearance of a ghostly girl who left behind the lunar wing. This item connected directly to the mythical being Cresselia, known for its ties to dreams and protection against nightmares. The implication that the girl may have been linked to Cresselia deepened the house's mystery, blending ghost stories with mythic figures. Though the game never confirmed her identity, the strange house left players with one of the most memorable supernatural experiences in the region. Even smaller corners carried hidden depth. The nature preserve in Black 2 and White 2 could only be reached after completing the full Unova Pokédex. Once Professor Juniper issued the special permit, trainers could travel to its hidden forest and encounter a rare, shiny Haxorus offered as a reward for patience and dedication. The preserve was not tied to grand myths, but to patience and persistence, reflecting the reward of thorough exploration and completion. Its tranquil atmosphere reinforced the idea that not all legends were tied to conflict. Some were tied to peace, serenity, and the joy of discovery. Obscure trivia about these locations enriches their significance. Liberty Garden's lighthouse mirrored real-world icons of independence, blending Pokemon's mythology with global symbolism. The desert resort's shifting sands mirrored the unpredictability of history as ruins vanished and reappeared with time. The Marvelous Bridge's ghostly encounter tied urban spaces to the supernatural, showing that modernity could not erase mystery. Village Bridge's layered soundtrack reflected the blending of culture and daily life, emphasizing community over spectacle. The abyssal ruins, with their untranslated inscriptions, reminded players that not all stories were meant to be fully understood. Taken together, these hidden corners and mysterious sites ensured that Unova was more than a linear journey. It was a region filled with spaces that invited interpretation, speculation, and reflection. Some locations whispered of forgotten civilizations, others celebrated culture and community, and still others unsettled with supernatural presences. Each added texture to the region, ensuring that exploration was never merely about reaching the next gym, but about uncovering fragments of a world rich with history and meaning. The release of Unova marked not only a shift in design and storytelling, but also in how the community interacted with the games. By the time Generation 5 arrived, online forums, fan sites, and theory channels had become central to the Pokemon experience. Players were no longer simply uncovering secrets alone. They were sharing ideas, interpretations, and myths with a global audience. As a result, Unova became one of the richest regions in terms of community-driven lore, with theories that blurred the line between fact and speculation. One of the most enduring discussions centered on the twin dragons Reshiram and Zekrom. Their division into truth and ideals was interpreted in countless ways, often tied to real-world philosophical or political ideas. Some fans argued that the split represented the tension between rationalism and romanticism, while others saw it as a commentary on scientific progress versus tradition. The fact that each player could only experience one side of the story in their version of the game fueled speculation about hidden meanings. This duality reflected the larger theme of perspective, and fans took it as an invitation to debate deeper truths. Kyurem, as the incomplete remnant of the original dragon, sparked perhaps the most intense wave of speculation. Its icy, hollow design led many to see it as a metaphor for emptiness, trauma, or loss. The introduction of its fusion forms in Black 2 and White 2 only deepened the discussion as players debated whether these represented healing or artificial reconciliation. Some interpreted the fusions as commentary on compromise, while others suggested they symbolized the dangers of forcing unity. The ambiguity of Kyurem's role ensured that fan theories never reached consensus, but this uncertainty became part of the region's enduring allure. The Relic Castle and abyssal ruins also inspired layers of speculation. Players noted that inscriptions within these ruins referenced kings and wealth, leading many to connect them to Arceus and its plates. The suggestion that Unova's ruins tied into the broader mythology of creation was never confirmed, yet the vagueness of the text encouraged interpretation. Some theories posited that these ruins were remnants of an ancient empire that had worshipped the original dragon, while others linked them to civilizations that had perished due to conflict or greed. The lack of definitive answers made the ruins fertile ground for endless debate. Another popular myth revolved around the Ghost Girl, encounters on the Marvelous Bridge and in the Strange House. Her sudden appearances, silent demeanor, and unexplained vanishings unsettled players, leading to speculation about her origin. Some connected her to Cresselia, noting that the lunar wing found in the Strange House tied her to dreams and protection against nightmares. Others saw her as a symbol of tragedy, perhaps a lost soul tied to the supernatural fabric of the region. The ambiguity of her presence made her one of the most memorable mysteries, with countless fan theories attempting to piece together her story. Victini also carried layers of myth beyond its official lore. Its placement on Liberty Garden, an island accessible only through an event, gave it an aura of exclusivity. Fans debated whether its connection to victory symbolized freedom, hope, or destiny. Some drew parallels between its lighthouse and real-world icons of independence, interpreting Victini as a metaphor for perseverance in the face of adversity. Others saw its event-only nature as a commentary on rarity itself, reinforcing the idea that true victory was elusive and not accessible to everyone. Fan interpretations also extended to characters. N, in particular, became the focus of intense discussion. His ability to hear the voices of Pokémon led some to speculate that he was not entirely human, perhaps altered by Getsis or blessed by mythology. His idealism, contrasted with Getsis's manipulation, fueled debates about whether N represented innocence, corrupted, or conviction misunderstood. Many fans found in him a figure of empathy, a character who resonated with those who struggled with identity or belonging. Theories about his origins, motives, and future ensured that he remained one of the most enigmatic and beloved figures in the franchise. Colress also attracted attention, with players dissecting his role as a morally ambiguous scientist. Some interpreted him as a cautionary figure, embodying the dangers of unchecked curiosity. Others argued that his neutrality made him less villainous than other antagonists, positioning him as a necessary counterweight to Plasma's ideology. His futuristic design, with mechanical elements integrated into his appearance, led to speculation about whether he symbolized the merging of human and machine. Though never confirmed, these interpretations highlighted the way Unova invited players to think critically about its characters. Even everyday details became sources of myth. The season's mechanic, which altered landscapes and availability, led to speculation about hidden events tied to time. Players scoured the calendar for patterns, convinced that certain Pokémon or items might appear only on specific days or months. Though most of these theories proved unfounded, the mechanic fostered a culture of curiosity, as if the world of Unova might still hold secrets waiting to be uncovered. Obscure fan myths also connected Unova to other regions. Some argued that the abyssal ruins linked directly to Sinnoh's myths, suggesting a shared origin between civilizations. Others speculated that Curum's frozen shell hinted at ties to the Regi trio, seeing parallels between ancient guardians and incomplete forms. Still others tied N's castle to the architecture of earlier regions, suggesting that Plasma's ambitions echoed the empires of the past. These cross-regional theories underscored the interconnectedness of the franchise, showing how fans wove stories that extended beyond one generation. Community myths were not limited to lore alone. Competitive history also fueled speculation and storytelling. Excadrill's dominance in sandstorms, for instance, led to exaggerated tales of its power, with some players joking that it could sweep entire teams single-handedly. Weather wars became legendary in their own right, remembered not only as a metagame, but as a cultural memory. Players recounted tales of improbable victories or crushing defeats tied to the climate, elevating mechanics into myths. Obscure trivia about these myths shows how deeply they resonated. For example, the Ghost Girl sprite was deliberately reused in different locations, fueling the idea that she had a broader story across the region. The Abyssal Ruins inscriptions were written in a cipher that required translation, making players feel as though they were archaeologists piecing together history. Even N's Ferris wheel encounter in Nimbasa became a focal point of theories, with fans analyzing his dialogue for hidden meaning. These details ensured that speculation thrived long after the game's release. Ultimately, the myths and fan theories surrounding Unova reflected the maturity of the community. Players were no longer satisfied with surface-level storytelling. They sought depth, connection, and meaning. The ambiguity of the region's lore invited them to participate in the act of storytelling, blurring the line between official canon and interpretation. This collaborative mythology made Unova not just a region within the games, but a living narrative shared across forums, videos, and conversations. Taken together, the myths of Unova revealed the enduring power of mystery, whether centered on dragons, ruins, ghosts, or characters. These interpretations reflected a hunger for meaning and connection. They ensured that the region lived on not only in memory, but in imagination, a place where truth and ideals clashed, not only within the story, but within the minds of those who explored it. When reflecting on the broader history of Pokémon, few regions have had as complex a cultural legacy as Unova. Its introduction during the 5th generation represented not just another step in the franchise's progression, but a bold experiment that reshaped how players, critics, and even future developers approached the series. Though its reception at launch was divisive, with some fans struggling to adjust to its innovations, time has transformed Unova into one of the most celebrated and influential regions in the franchise. One of the earliest cultural impacts came from the decision to introduce a Pokédex composed entirely of new species during the first run of Black and White. For the first time, players could not encounter familiar companions from previous generations until the post-game. This bold choice forced fans to step outside of nostalgia and embrace discovery in its purest form. At the time, this move divided the community. Some appreciated the freshness, while others missed the comfort of old favorites. Yet over the years, this design has been reappraised as a creative triumph, reminding players what it meant to enter a new region unburdened by the past. The narrative ambition of Unova also marked a turning point. Prior regions had touched on myths, criminal organizations, and champions, but Generation 5 elevated storytelling to new heights. The introduction of N as a central character, the philosophical conflict between truth and ideals, and the manipulative cruelty of Ketsis created a narrative density that rivaled role-playing games beyond Pokémonday. This narrative depth reshaped expectations for what a mainline Pokémon game could deliver, influencing later entries like X and Y, Sun and Moon, and even Sword and Shield, which adopted more elaborate plots and thematic ambitions. Mechanically, The innovations of Unova left lasting cultural footprints. The weather wars of Generation 5 became legendary in competitive communities, remembered as both chaotic and thrilling. Though later generations altered weather mechanics to restore balance, the memory of endless rain, sand, and sun continues to color discussions of the era. The team preview mechanic, introduced here, became a permanent staple, changing the psychology of battles forever. Even less prominent experiments, like rotation and triple battles, reflected the developers' willingness to push boundaries, inspiring fans to think about what forms battles could take. The cultural impact of the dream world also extended far beyond its original form. By tying hidden abilities and rare content to online connectivity, it foreshadowed the integration of global communities into Pokémonday. Though the dream world itself was eventually discontinued, the concept of hidden abilities persisted, reshaping competitive landscapes for generations. This mechanic symbolized the increasing fusion of single-player experiences with larger online networks, a theme that would become central to the franchise moving forward. Visually, Unova also influenced the artistic direction of Pokémonday. The dynamic camera angles, more elaborate battle animations, and ambitious cityscapes like Castilia set new standards for presentation. These choices signaled the series' readiness to embrace cinematic qualities, bridging the gap between handheld limitations and future possibilities on more powerful systems. Later regions borrowed heavily from this experimentation, with Kalos building on verticality, Alola emphasizing cultural identity, and Galar exploring scale and spectacle. The fandom's reinterpretation of Unova over time is equally telling. At launch, many players criticized its designs as too unusual or disconnected from the established style. Pokemon like Garbodor or Vanillux became memes, often mocked as uninspired. Yet as the years passed, appreciation grew for the creativity and risk-taking these designs represented. The fact that Unova dared to experiment with industrial themes, abstract inspirations, and global mythology came to be seen as a strength. What was once derided as odd is now celebrated as imaginative, reflecting how cultural reception evolves over time. Obscure trivia highlights this transformation. For example, polls conducted in later years often rank Unova among the top regions in terms of story and world building, a far cry from its initial mixed reception. The character of N, once controversial for his unusual role, is now frequently listed among the most beloved figures in Pokemon history. Even the much-debated designs of certain Pokemon have become fan favorites, appearing in merchandise, artwork, and competitive teams. This shift underscores how time reshapes perception, allowing risks to be appreciated after nostalgia softens initial resistance. The influence of Unova can also be traced in spin-offs and adaptations. The Pokemon Adventures manga arc, based on Black and White, embraced the region's philosophical depth, weaving complex storylines that mirrored and expanded upon the games. The anime, too, experimented with more serialized storytelling during this era, reflecting the influence of the game's ambition. Even years later, references to Unova appear in newer media, cementing its status as a cultural cornerstone rather than a passing experiment. Community-driven reinterpretations have also played a role. Fan art, theory videos, and online discussions often return to Unova as a symbol of depth and maturity in Pokémonday. Theories about Kyurem's symbolism, N's humanity, and the connections between ruins and mythology remain popular topics. This enduring engagement reflects how the region invited participation, encouraging fans to co-create meaning rather than simply consume content. By leaving mysteries unsolved and philosophies ambiguous, Unova ensured that its legacy would live on in interpretation as much as in gameplay. The region's cultural impact is perhaps most visible in its anticipation of remakes or sequels. Black 2 and White 2 were themselves unprecedented, the first true sequels in the mainline series. Their existence demonstrated the developers' recognition that Unova's story was too expansive for a single pair of games. Years later, fans continue to call for updated versions of these titles, often citing them as some of the richest experiences in the franchise. The ongoing demand for a return reflects not only nostalgia, but also recognition of their enduring relevance. Even in broader gaming culture, Unova left a mark. Its willingness to tackle themes of truth, ideals, manipulation, and resilience distinguished it from other titles in the franchise. Critics often cite Generation 5 as the point where Pokémon storytelling matured, paving the way for more ambitious narratives in future role-playing games. Its influence can be seen not only in Pokémon, but in how fans and developers discuss the potential of storytelling in long-running franchises. Taken together, the cultural impact of Unova is a story of evolution both within the franchise and within the hearts of fans. From its initial divisive reception to its current status as a celebrated and influential region, its journey mirrors the very themes it explored: conflict, growth, and reconciliation. It showed that Pokémon could be more than comfort and tradition. It could be a space for experimentation, philosophy, and cultural dialogue. In doing so, it carved a place in history that continues to resonate, ensuring that its influence endures long after its first release. Looking back at the journey through Unova, it becomes clear that the region was more than a backdrop for adventure. It was a bold statement about what Pokémon could be, filled with innovation, mystery, and philosophy. From its sprawling cities and intricate ruins to its unforgettable characters and competitive upheavals, Unova stood as a turning point, one that continues to shape how players remember the franchise. Its legacy is not measured solely in battles won or creatures caught, but in the stories it invited players to uncover and the emotions it stirred along the way. The foundation of its identity lay in contrast. This was a region of skyscrapers and countryside, of truth and ideals, of ancient myths and modern science. The duality ran through every corner, whether in the split design of Opelucid City, the seasonal shifts across its routes, or the mirrored journeys of rivals whose growth reflected different values. Even the legendary dragons, divided from one whole into opposing forces, embodied this theme of contrast and reconciliation. By weaving these opposites into its very design, Unova became a region that constantly reminded players that no single perspective was complete. Obscure corners reinforced this philosophy. The strange house whispered of dreams and nightmares, leaving players unsettled yet intrigued. The abyssal ruins offered fragments of a forgotten empire, daring explorers to piece together meaning from incomplete inscriptions. The desert resort buried myths beneath shifting sands, while Liberty Garden stood as a beacon of independence and hope. These places were not just optional locations, they were narrative devices, grounding the region in mystery and encouraging reflection. Each site carried its own personality, ensuring that exploration was always layered with discovery. The characters who guided the journey deepened its impact. Alder reminded players that strength meant nothing without purpose, while rivals like Bianca and Charon illustrated different forms of growth. N became the philosophical heart of the region, asking questions about morality and connection that resonated far beyond the battles themselves. Villains like Getsus and the Sages forced players to confront the dangers of manipulation and ideology. Even side figures, artists in Castelia, musicians on Village Bridge, pilots in Mistralton, added texture, turning the region into a living world where every voice mattered. Mechanics reinforced identity as well. The introduction of Team Preview shifted battles from guessing games to contests of foresight. Weather wars dominated competitive landscapes, teaching players about synergy and adaptation. Abilities like Prankster and Contrary redefined strategy, while moves like Scald and Quiver Dance became infamous for their influence. Even formats that never became staples, such as rotation battles, reflected the experimental spirit of the generation. Each innovation, whether enduring or fleeting, contributed to the sense that Unova was not afraid to take risks. Obscure trivia about development further enriches its legacy. Early concept art revealed that the region was always meant to feel modern and global, reflecting the ambition of a franchise ready to expand its horizons. The choice to model it on New York symbolized Pokemon's growing international reach, while the decision to fill the regional Pokédex exclusively with new species emphasized a commitment to reinvention. These decisions were not made lightly. They reflected an understanding that for Pokémon to endure, it had to evolve alongside its audience. The cultural impact of these choices is still felt today. Later generations borrowed heavily from Unova's innovations, whether in storytelling, mechanics, or design philosophy. The dual games of Black and White 2 stood as the first true sequels in the series, proving that Pokémon could sustain more elaborate narratives across multiple titles. The idea of connecting mythology to ruins and inscriptions influenced regions like Kalos and Galar. Even the competitive shifts, sparked by weather dominance and dreamworld abilities, left ripples that shaped metagames for years. Community interpretations ensured that the legacy of Unova grew richer over time. Myths about ghostly figures on bridges, debates about the symbolism of Kyurem, and theories about ancient kings turned the region into fertile ground for discussion. Fans embraced the ambiguity, turning unanswered questions into shared stories. This collaborative storytelling mirrored the themes of truth and ideals, as players brought their own perspectives into the narrative. In this way, Unova extended beyond the games themselves, becoming a living myth sustained by its community. The passage of time has only elevated its reputation. What was once criticized for unusual designs or bold departures is now celebrated for creativity and depth. Species once dismissed as strange have become fan favorites, embraced for their uniqueness and personality. Characters once seen as divisive are now recognized as some of the most compelling in the franchise. Even competitive chaos, once lamented, is now remembered fondly as one of the most dynamic eras in battling. The region's identity has been reshaped by nostalgia, but also by recognition of its ambition. At its core, Unova was a region about perspective. It asked players to consider ideals and truths, to reconcile opposites, and to find meaning in both triumph and loss. It celebrated diversity, from its melting pot cities to its globally inspired myths. It challenged players to think, to question, and to grow, turning what might have been a simple adventure into something more reflective. By doing so, it ensured that its story would resonate long after its games had ended. In the end, Unova's legacy lies not only in its innovations, but in its ability to inspire. It reminded players that Pokemon was not just about collecting or battling, but about connecting with characters, with ideas, and with the world around them. It was a region that dared to be different, and in doing so, it became unforgettable. For those who journeyed through its streets, crossed its bridges, and uncovered its ruins, Unova was more than a game. It was a story, a philosophy, and a memory carried forward as one of the most impactful chapters in the history of the franchise.